Sorry. All right, let's call the meeting to order here at 8:10 a.m. Sorry for the late start. Old business budget discussion of budget timeline. It's really just next week. We'll have our first reading of the draft budget, which gets a little bit into next meeting date and agenda. So we'll jump over to revolving accounts policies. I know you put together those slides, and then you also found some sample documents from communities. Do you want to go through the slides?
If we can just go through the slides. So the slides that I shared in the folder, it's just a copy of the presentation that we reviewed last year. And it just gives kind of an overview of revenue offsets, but I think that it's relevant to the discussion today. And so I put this in here. I don't know if this is something that we may want to share on the budget website as well. But it just kind of speaks to when we talk about revenue offset, what that means. And so in just saying that we have a number of revolving accounts, they can be different types. So some of them are user fee revolving accounts. Some of them are tied to federal grants. Some of them are state reimbursements. That's the circuit breaker program. And then the other sources. And it's always just important to note, I know we talked about this at warrant committee, that a decrease in any of the budget offset or reduction in revenue would have the same impact to the operating budget as an increase in expenditure. So that's something that's really important to remember as we talk about some of the changes that we may make with our revolving funds going forward. So an example of a revolving fund is the extracurricular fees. The determination of the fees are decided on an annual basis. So I think last year we reviewed the fees on an iterative basis. We started in December. I think the last fee that we approved probably was into the March time period. We have a full fee schedule, but this is just a snapshot. We actually had made some changes to this since I had put this presentation together. So there is an updated rate for this year for FY26. But you can see this just kind of an example.
Did you see the fee schedule? Have you seen that back then?
I think this was like school committee meeting number one.
It might have been, yeah.
That we voted on these changes or something. So I have seen something.
So I can pop that in the folder.
That'd be great.
Just the most recent. And then in the most recent version of the fee schedule that lists them all, there is a column that shows the date of the last change. So it kind of gives you a sense of like when we've updated it.
And so this is like $37.50 to participate, is a family fee to participate in.
It's a student fee.
Yeah. Student fee.
Yeah.
And to participate in any club.
That's and so it's at Pierce and then at the high school. We actually updated it last year. So like I said, FY26 is blank here, but the updated fee schedule has the new rate, and it's for the clubs. And then we, at the high school level, and I believe we did it for Pierce as well, we added a different fee for drama. And it's actually a higher fee just to reflect the conversation that we had. Was drama was the time commitment is more reflective of like participating in a sport. And so we didn't think that the 37 or 25 was reflective of that program. So we updated it, and now I believe it's $100 for a student to participate.
No.
But I'll pop a copy of that into the folder for today.
Yeah, I think that's helpful context. Obviously, we're not adjusting the fees within this conversation, but
yeah. But the fees again are so closely tied to the revenue that's coming in, because that's essentially what makes up the offset. So just to provide some context on why our budget offset's important, they help to reduce the total operating budget funding need. So you can see here the adjusted gross budget was for FY25 was $71 million. We had over $4 million in revenue offsets. That was grants, circuit breaker, transportation revolving, a number of different revolving. And then you can see the FY25 net budget amount. That doesn't match. I don't know where that number came from. So just use this as more like, because that doesn't match the FY25 operating budget. But you can just see the relationship between, you have a gross budget number, we receive in revenue offsets, so that helps reduce that number. And then the net budget is what is funding from operating account.
Which number did you say is not accurate?
The 67.
This one.
Oh, got it.
That number should essentially be what your town meeting voted.
Correct.
It should be, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, this one.
correct. And so budget offsets can fluctuate from year to year. They may be reduced over time. However, expenses typically increase year per year. So an example of a budget offset fluctuating or being reduced would be some of the COVID funding that we received. So the federal funding through ARPA and ESSER. We received that funding. There were expenses that were associated with that funding, and then that funding was eliminated. And so that's why you either take those expenses and you roll that into your budget. That's a lot of the conversation, was how that funding was creating funding cliffs for communities because of the rapid drop off in funding available, or in some instances, if you have expenses that are associated with supplemental funding, then when the funding goes away, the expense would then go away because it's not sustainable.
Katie, I assume most of the 4 million in offset is special education or
That's
grants or whatever. Yeah.
that is probably the biggest percentage. So again, this is I just wanted to provide this just to give some overall like context to revolving funds and kind of like the mechanism of how they work when we're looking at the budget and the relationship to the school's operating budget.
That's great. Thank you.
And so I also provided some information specific to the revolving accounts that we have here at the school department. There are several documents in the folder. One of the documents is actually gives the legal reference to the Mass General Law, so that you can see why we're able to have each one of the revolving accounts. And that was just put in there as a kind of like a point of reference. This tells each one of the revolving account the legal reference, and then it shows if there's any statutory spending ceiling. It shows that you can carry forward the balance year over year. And if there are any kind of limitations around what you can spend the revenue. So this is set for us all. Every municipality, school district needs to follow this chart.
So you cannot have a revolving account that's not on this, correct?
So the revolving account, some of them may fall under like certain categories, and it may not specifically say it on the grid, but you would have to tie it to one of these categories. Mm-hmm.
Every revolving fund has to come back to one of
Yes.
these.
Yes. So that's just kind of the list, so you can see that. So when we talk about the revolving accounts and how kind of like the mechanism of how we're using them, we're not just doing that because that's what, Katie Blake thinks it's a good idea. We're doing it based off this information. And then this is the revolving fund history. So this goes all the way back to 2015. You can see some of the balances, and it has just the list of just a number of revolving accounts. Some of them we don't use anymore. Some of them are still active. But I think and this was something that this isn't a sheet that I put together. It's something that I somewhat inherited, which I'm grateful for because I think it shows some really good history. The piece that was really interesting to me is to look every single year and just see the revenue that we're receiving and then how much money we spent. And so typically the revenue and the expenditures are similar in the amount. But if you go over to the FY24 budget, that's the year that I think it's really significant. And that was the year that that was kind of the first year that we experienced the deficit. So,
Yeah, so we're making about $1 million here, about $1 million there.
And it's Katie, is it we really have to look at all of these in isolation because looking at the bottom number of the totality doesn't mean we can attract any of that money. All these things have to be cooked in separate pots. They can't be added together. Do you know what I mean? So this isn't a unique collection of accounts that can be added up at the bottom. If that is the aggregate, they all have different seasonality. They all have different rules. They all have different offsets. So they're really all unique into themselves. For example, summer school, you collect the money in FY26 this year, but we'll expend the money in FY27 because you start the program in July. Do you mean so? There's all the seasonality. Well, all that said, to Katie's point, what did you take in and what did you spend? And so that's important for like community schools. Like, like if you have to just, I'm sorry, Katie, you go ahead.
No, that's okay. I think the important part really that it almost feels like there's been a little just over the past several years of the budget history, there's been some confusion. And so when you look at this for FY24, we brought in $7.6 million in revenue. And again, to John's point, that's in totality. So that each account has to be, the expenditures have to be specific to what that revenue was brought in for. So it's not like we can say, oh, we brought in $7 million and we're going to spend that $7 million on copy paper. Like we can't do that. We have to spend the money on the specific reason why we brought that revenue in. But if you look at the expenditures for FY24, our expenditures were essentially $2.4 million higher than the revenue that we're bringing in. And that's not sustainable. And so in those expenditures were real expenditures. That wasn't a one-time expenditure. That wasn't something where the expense was going away. And so because we used revolving funds to cover those expenditures in FY25, those revolving funds weren't available to us anymore. So those expenses had to be picked up by the operating budget. And that's why when we started the year last year and when we looked at the Q2 report, we said, it looks like we're going to have about a $2 million deficit because in looking at the revolving fund utilization from the previous year, seeing that those expenses did not go away, but that revenue went away, that revenue is not available to us anymore. That's what created kind of that issue that we experienced last year. And that's why it's so important for us to make sure that we're not doing that on an ongoing basis, because we were assigning expenses to a revenue source that was not sustainable. And so I think that is kind of like overall the basis of why we're having this conversation. And that I think that framing is why when we look at each account specifically and look at the revenue that we're bringing in and we look at the expenditures, I would say that the important piece of this potentially could be almost setting, if we're saying we want to look and say, okay, we're going to set our policy around these parameters, I think it may be important to say we should set the policy around making parameters around how much of the revolving fund we're spending in a year. Because what happened in 24 is we just spent too much and we didn't have funding for it in the next year. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, I feel like that kind of makes it, I almost confuse myself in explaining it. So does that make sense?
Well, to me, it really, between that and not budgeting to actuals, you can see why the whole thing fell apart. Jimmy, like this is the kind of a snapshot that you.
Well, this was the way, and we knew this.
That's how you made up.
This is how
you paid the bill.
Yeah,
you charged everything.
Former staff.
Yeah, you were short on your mortgage and you paid it.
Yeah, that's it right there. So that's the $2.4 million closing that gap by over leveraging these accounts.
Correct.
And then to a lesser extent, we had to do it last year too, right? For 900,000. I do think it's informative, instructive that this number is lower than we've ever been.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We're back almost.
I mean, last year you had to take a bigger share of the revolving accounts than we did in FY24. Like, took more dollars out in FY24, but took 50% of the revolving accounts.
Yeah, but that's because there was nothing left.
I know.
There was a higher percentage of it. I think.
What does it mean practically when a revolving account is negative?
It can't be negative. So if your revolving account is negative at the end of the year, we have to close that off to the general fund. And so that essentially would be closed off to the town's free cash.
Okay.
And so we have 90 days to clear a negative balance. Or else it would go against our free cash allocation. And so circuit breaker at the end of the year, we were negative because the funds weren't received until July, but because it was within the 90-day window, it didn't impact free cash.
I guess he's saying like general music is negative listed here, I think negative 23,000.
And I'm not even sure that the general music line is one that we use, so I can look into that one. That may just be like a formula error in this document, because the account that we use, there is a music account that is used, but it's not the general music one.
Gotcha.
So I will look into that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And we did not have any accounts that we needed to clear balances to free cash last year.
Is Blue Hills Preschool the preschool at the Tucker that?
Correct. Yeah.
That's operating in the red?
No, that is.
It was, that's why 25. That's why 24. It's like,
It says it has $1,000 balance.
I think that's why I forget.
Just
It seems like similar to maybe community schools that was making money last few years. It's now not.
And then we took a chunk.
in community schools has made a substantial upgrade in the types of services that they offer,
Yeah, but
like nurses, and, intervention specialists, inclusion specialists. So they're going to be in need of a increase in fees.
Mhm.
So some of these involve, the reason why I just to say this out loud because maybe people know it. Circuit breakers are different, right? The money comes in it's a reimbursement from the state. You hold it, you expend it, et cetera. Athletics is how much do we put in from gate fees in student fees to play the sport, combined with money from operating. So it's like a multi-pronged kind of. So we start talking about buses and sports. The reason why fees comes into it, to where Katie started, is that those are the different pieces of the cocktail, right? If you add a little bit more fees and you don't have to put as much from the revolving account, and you can, but also having the flexibility, like when you get to the point in 3 years where you have normal balances again, you do want to give Katie, in Katie's role, the ability to move those as levers to make things work. Because when you're in the last quarter and you see that, you've had some ups and downs with, like, every team made a tournament this year in the fall.
Mhm.
So good news story, but oh my God, look at all, every time a bus goes off the campus, they go, why couldn't they just lose in the last game of the year kind of thing, so. But you want the flexibility of moving operation money over when you need to, because you had a good year in athletics and you want to
Yeah.
So but to me, I'd really like to prioritize the ones that we really think we need to pay attention to.
Mhm.
And I don't know if the policies can be the same blanketedly. I think they need to be different for each revolving account, whether that be focused on circuit breaker, transportation, athletics, whatever the big ones, community schools.
Yeah.
Food service, we really can't touch. We can touch it to a certain extent because Katie manages all those dollars. We had some expenses to that, but and then we have to go through this, and anybody who is on a year-to-year basis not paying, whose expenses outweigh their revenue, that are only surviving because they had a balance back in the day.
Yeah.
They have to be year-to-year solvent. This is the only cash flow kind of communication that we have in municipal budget.
Yeah.
We don't worry about cash flow from the bigger sense. This is our only cash flow worry.
So if you go to the other document, so this is the history, so you can kind of see every year the revenue all the way back to 2017. So then I tried to take that document and just take the information from last year and organize it in a way, because each one of the accounts acts somewhat differently. And so I tried on this document to organize it by the type of account. So with revolving funds, you can have a self-sustaining account. And so those funds are typically used for programs where the expenses fluctuate, just like athletics is a perfect example. However, for a self-sustaining account, the goal is for a break-even financial status. So examples of that, those are our accounts kind of in that first section. The summer school programs that we operate, adult school, which is our driver's ed program, community schools, and you can kind of go down. We have some fundraising student accounts, which I don't know that those are kind of separate, because it's the money that is raised by the students goes directly into accounts and then can be expended for some of the requests that they're asking for. And then AP testing is a self-sustaining account. So the students are paying the $90 fee to take the test, and then we're just essentially paying that fee to the college board. And then the second section is the offset. And so to exactly what John was just saying, those revolving accounts are not self-sustaining. So the revenue that we receive in is just offsetting a portion of the overall expense, but it's also coupled with funding from the operating budget in order to completely fund whichever program. So athletics only funds a portion of the overall expenses. Same thing with circuit breakers. Circuit breakers only funding a portion of the tuition payments that we're paying for out of district placements. Preschool only pays for one teacher in some instances. It's not paying for the entire preschool program. And same thing with transportation. Transportation only pays for a fraction of the overall transportation expense, yellow bus transportation expense that we have. So kind of two different buckets. And I think the way that we look at them with our self-sustaining accounts, we want them to remain self-sustaining. And so we almost have to make sure that the fees are set appropriately so that those funds can remain self-sustaining. Because if they start, because we don't really in any of the accounts have significant balances, if they start to not be self-sustaining in any fiscal year, we're going to start eating away at those balances. And then it may get to a point where we'd have to talk about funding them from the operating budget, which I don't think we're in the position to be able to do that. And then it's the same with all of our offset accounts. We just have to be mindful of the fees that we're charging, and then the revenue and how much of that revenue that we're using to offset the expenses. As those expenses increase year over year, we know transportation 8% increase that's in the contract that we just signed into. So just being mindful of those increases will occur year over year, and we may have to potentially look at the fees if we want to continue to be able to offset the expenses at the same rate.
Katie, are there any offset accounts that you think should be self-sustaining, just aren't there yet? Or do we, like, I'm looking at like some of these like CAS program, I don't know if that's like CAS, et cetera.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the kind of lighter ones should be all self-sustaining, right? So the after-school program passive here should be self-sustaining. You should only be giving out, you should only hold an after-school program class, like you might put a menu of like 12 things for the kids to do. And they have to have, the way we used to do it is that if you don't get 10 students, which pays the stipend, you don't run it. So if it doesn't get up to 10 students, then you don't run it. Or if you have a couple that go way over, and I have 20 in one class and I only have a couple of 9s, and I run a couple of 9s because I got a little juice from these. And, so but in the aggregate, it should be self-sustaining, or it just can't run. And I think that, when you get into clubs and activities, clubs at the high school and middle school it's a big number. It's a $200,000 expense.
It's huge.
Just a high school.
Mhm.
And the revenue offsets, the revenue coming in there's no one that runs this. It's in every building, every high school in America, unless they have a dedicated person just to this money in, money out thing and supervising it, and it's happening on a regular basis. It just feels like a big ice cube that you're trying to pick up and hold. Do you know what I mean? Like it just keeps falling and you can't. It's Karen Cahill ran orientation for every teacher who wanted to do a club. She gave them the rules. She told them if you didn't have up to X amount of students, you couldn't run a club. She really was vigilant about it this year, and it still feels like it's like, do you know what I mean? And then students drive clubs, right? So then you don't want the student to come and say we want a club that talks about recycling or rock climbing or whatever the thing is, and then a teacher volunteers, and then there's contracted languages. If a teacher volunteers for 2 years in a row, it gets to become a club. And I reserve the right to not run any clubs if I don't want clubs. We get to say what clubs run. The union doesn't get to say what, you know what I mean? But and so these are small things that just add up. That you know what I mean? That and they don't, to Katie's point, the fees never keep up with the inflation of the stipend. And then in the fee collection, it's just a challenge to have that done. It's not
Like there's fees that are no readers.
Yeah, or people come and go. Like I have the vinyl record club, and everybody comes and listens to vinyl, and then it becomes a cool thing. So now 10 more kids just showing up, and they never paid. And you know what I mean? It ebbs and flows a lot. I don't know what it exactly looks like at Milton High because I haven't experienced it this year yet. But this is not uncommon for that just to be a little bit looser. And so you end up having it be more of a burden on the operating budget. That's essentially what it is. That's what that was. And so my biggest worry is from a self-sustaining lens to make sure the community schools has our fee structure set in order for that to be self-sustaining because they have taken on more responsibility. So that's one thing that we want to think about. And then obviously, I think in my eyes, I have highlighted transportation, Medicaid, circuit breaker, facility rental, athletic revolving in community schools. If we wanted to kind of focus on a couple.
I think all those are good. I think, I mean, we obviously want all these to fund. I think from a policy perspective, the question is beyond funding. In my mind, is there some type of baseline kind of pot that we feel like needs to be created within these accounts beyond what we spend on an annual basis to create some buffer?
Yes.
To say if we have a big swing of kids participating in clubs that don't pay, we have something within that budget that can accommodate for that, right? Or we have again something within community schools where if we need to hire a one-to-one nurse in a particular year and didn't budget for that, like we have some buffer that can kind of cover for those costs because there will be some kind of up and down. I don't, to your point of like needing to provide the school department some flexibility with how they manage the budget. I totally agree with that. And I'm not 100% sure I disagree with what was done here as it relates to like utilizing these accounts to balance the budget. There was a lot of issues, I think, concerns with in terms of how we got to that point. But like ultimately, that might have been the best decision for closing the budget in FY24. I think what I'm trying to think of from a policy perspective is, what are the the foundations we are trying to put in place to have robust kind of balances within these accounts. And then what are the checks and balances say like, hey, the school department needs to do this. Okay. From a community perspective, from a school committee perspective, I think our standpoint is like, okay, at what point do we need to be informed? Because if Katie's moving $500 here and there to like cover something, like that's not a big, that's just work that you'll need to do. A $2.5 million deficit is like, okay, how do we monitor that a bit better than we're able to within this year? So like getting to the policy docs themselves, I appreciate you sharing this. I think this one's interesting. To me, this one mostly is just informative.
Yes.
It doesn't really have policy.
It's not.
I like this part. I was putting that within mind of like being clear on, for anybody, what are the things that are bringing in money? What do we spend money from this account on? This seems like a lot of work to maintain on a yearly basis. So I don't know how helpful it is. And even this, we keep this kind of in the other documents. Maybe not. I do like the kind of related laws, I think that's always helpful kind of context. And I think the purpose, overview of purpose, because I still have questions of like, what is the difference between the Copeland Foundation account and then the rental account versus.
Sure.
So like there's still some of that I think would be helpful. It kind of brings me to the doc. This was based upon the one that was shared to the Budget Coordination Committee. And so I just kind of changed some stuff around. But essentially what they did was kind of list all of their kind of reserve accounts, talked about what is the target that they want to have within those reserve accounts. Most of it was like 2 to 3% in order to create some buffer. And then like what would they use the fund?
2 to 3% of expenditures.
Yeah, I think so. And so again, I can pull up that document that Nick shared previously. And then below they have like a little section about each account, and it's somewhat similar to this in terms of like what is the purpose. And so from my perspective, I think the work really is like this part, like, and I have a lot of question marks there because I'm just not sure. There could be plenty of these accounts where we just say what is in, what's out is out. And it's just going to be kind of one-to-one. There's not much monitoring. We don't need much reserve in the adult education account. We don't need 3 months of expenditures. There's not really an operation there. It's just for the AP accounts, right? There's no 3 months of operating, right? It's just they pay the $90 and then they take the test for a pass through. But I think there are, to your point of like, what are the ones where we want to have some type of pot behind the actual expenditures on an annual year?
Yes.
What is the size of that? Is the question what we can kind of get to. And are there other goals also for like generating costs? Because I think athletic fees, right? There's the paying the stipends, there's the paying the buses. And then there's
uniforms, equipment.
There's like, how much are we? How much are we covering? Kind of that. How much are we covering the football stands replacement, right? For all the athletics that use that facility or use Copeland. Like, are we trying to gather any portion of those funds to help that kind of cover for capital needs, given they use it? Maybe not. But those are things that I think about of like, are there other goals within these funds? Those things, I think, to your point, have impacts on what the fees are, like how high are these fees? Are we actually able to accomplish any of these goals?
Mm-hmm.
But I think starting from a place of like, what is our goal? Is that something that we think families who are participating in athletics, like a portion of that should be going to kind of a maintenance cost associated with the spaces that they're using, use that for the refinishing of the, instead of waiting on the capital committee to give us money to refinish the Copeland floor, fieldhouse floor.
So that Katie and I and Laura talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
The Copeland rentals in the facilities revolving account, Copeland Rentals was supposed to had many years ago. Anytime anybody rented the field, would have to pay a surcharge for lack of a better term that went directly to that revolving account that was dedicated to facilities maintenance, and also capital planning to the field over every X amount of years.
Mhm.
So there's a specific charge for Brooks Field that the goal was to have it build up enough to be able to go back to the Copelands and say, we've saved 500. And now we're asking you for another 500 because it cost $1 million.
Mhm.
So it's like, it was demonstrating partnership.
Mhm.
And so they actually dedicated the funds. They used to fund the rental coordinator role in an effort to make sure that the money that they were making by renting facilities went back to maintenance, and that the surcharge for the field was used in order to create a capital savings account
Mhm.
for the time we need to go to them to do stuff over.
Mhm.
It looks like over the past 14 years, that's been flattened out to that's not what happens, right?
That's what happens.
The facilities revolving account should be going to maintenance of the auditorium in the school classrooms and the spaces that are used by rentals,
Mhm.
and go to the ongoing maintenance of that. If it's a basketball net, if it's a soundboard or whatever, that should be out of that account. So it should never be an expense to the town, but to the schools, right? And the Copeland rental was actually specifically for the field, the surcharge for the capital.
Yeah.
That was 15 years, but
Yeah, I mean, I think again, our kids use those spaces all the time. And so, separate from the rentals, like there's some just operating costs of maintaining these things. The rental costs also cover the custodians who have to be on site, contract to cover for those things. Nothing close to yeah, but I don't know if I think that eventually gets to the fee question of like RFPs high enough that they are accomplishing those goals that we're both being able to pay for the staffing required to provide access and building whatever pot we feel like we need on an annual basis. But that's the question, like, what is that pot that we think we need to be generating through these fees based upon our current rental quantity that we think gives the school departments flexibility to cover those needs. So
I don't know if this is what you're saying, Mark, but a way to think about it be like, so for whatever, for any of those areas for Copeland, we think that the rental usage generates X percentage of our capital expenditure. And so therefore the fee, the surcharge or whatever should cover that amount. It seems like whatever we're charging for rentals should cover the depreciation on the facility, right? I mean, is that what you're saying?
yeah, and maybe it's not 100%.
Like we shouldn't be, I don't think we should be coming out of our pocket to pay for capital improvements that are for capital wear and tear that's generated from it.
Yeah, the issue is what is generated from the rental versus what is generated from gym class or our own students using it for volleyball.
Well, I'm saying we could figure that math out.
No, 100%.
Estimate it.
Yeah, I'm just saying I don't know if it's 100%. I don't know if it's, again, our rentals is only 20%, but we want rentals to generate 30%. And like they actually want to put a little more burden on that. Because we can. I don't know. I'm not. I think that's not.
my advice for this exercise today for what we need to do, which more specific relates to the direct budget, the facilities rental revolving and all of the conversation we're having now is a hornet's nest.
Yeah.
And I think we should pause it
Okay.
because it involves, what do we do with Park and Rec? What do we do with the free basketball to Tucker, which is a nightmare? What do we do with the free down the Glover ones, which is a nightmare? So there's a lot of rental stuff that we're trying to work out.
Mhm.
My hope and expectation for this work would be to identify the ones that we really want to pay attention to in an effort to guide our budgeting work for FY27 and beyond, in order to demonstrate to the town why we're allocating certain monies to revolving accounts for 27 that may take away from our ability to fund positions, and in the policy or the guidance or the appropriate usage balance that we're striving for justifies dedicating certain revenue to that in order to have a long-term plan that may be in conflict with people saying, what I really would like to have one so here. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I think that the lost books in the rental and the preschool, we'll have to figure that out as we go. But these bigger ones where we have to potentially dedicate money now from operating to a revolving account balance by the end of fiscal year 26 in order to make sure that certain funds start with a balance that we have agreed to should be at least the first step of that. And then have a second step and have a third step. So at the end of FY 29, we're looking at healthy balances in community schools, circuit breaker, athletics, like the big ones. So we have the levers in order to kind of deal with the extra 3 buses that go to the tournament or the 5 kids that move into the district without a district placement. The guidance from the state is one way to help our circuit breaker, right? That's 1 year's worth of circuit breaker. So let's build a plan that says in FY 27, we hope to have 1/3 of that as a balance. That's 1 million. You know, what is that number we want to strive for as guidance? So that I'd like to focus on a couple of those because they're the levers that we're trying to replenish that are going to come at the expense of something this year.
And it's just such an important piece of the work that we're going to talk about next week. And as we start talking about the FY 27 budget, because we could come to you next week and we're almost making assumptions when we're building the budget. But then if we create a policy that isn't in line with the assumptions, then there could be a significant change. So I think I think going back to the budget philosophy that we talked about for this year, this needs to be a multi-year conversation.
Correct.
We're not going to be able to fix this in 1 year. And I think that I don't want to keep on looking at the history, but the history is a really important part of it. When you allocate funding in 1 year, we're going to have to try to adjust for that in a 3 to 5 year basis moving forward, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's just something that we have to consider, that like we're not going to be able to, I don't want to say fix, but we're not going to be able to fix the balances in 1 year. It may take us 3 to 5 years, but it's just something that it's an important goal that I think we should have. So that's a good step.
Right. So here's a direct exercise for me. So if we want to say that as of July 1 of 26, which would be the beginning of FY 27, that we would like to see X amount of dollars in, that the guidance would be that for us, where we are in Milton, that we're striving for 1 year of circuit breaker as the goal, that we want to see a balance going into FY 27 of X amount of 500,000, 700,000. And for transportation, we want to see one that's set. So whatever we do, whatever we collect, and whatever the rotation is, we know that we're going to make a deposit into that account to ensure that we're starting the next fiscal year appropriate. Then at the end of fiscal 27, when we begin fiscal 28, we want to make that to go circuit breaker will go to maybe 1.2 million. And we want to have that incremental goal set for those big pictures, because the reason why that's important is if the pie is this big for FY 27, absent any additional funds to put deposits into those accounts, they're going to have to come out of the existing pie that we have.
Mhm.
So we're going to have to justify that against something that may be a reduction force. Do you know what I mean? And people are going to, well, why didn't that happen? Or how can we have to do that? So we're going to have to commit to those being bills that we have to pay.
Mhm.
Those aren't optional anymore. It's just like, so we're going to say that these 5 revolving accounts are going to have a deposit of some sort, that we're going to be vigilant and pay them, and we're going to prioritize them over other things for the next 3 years until we get to the balances that are appropriate, where the give and take will be able to be be in play every year, because they have ins and outs. But until that point, we have to take from what we have. So,
I mean, I agree with that. And I would just encourage us, and if we have a policy that looks something like this, to set the targets that we think should be in there long term. Like, and we're going to be, out of compliance with policy for a few years. But that way we know
what the end game is.
what the end game is. And maybe we can have as part of the policy, we can have something in here that says, I don't know, something to the effect of like, if these balances are not currently met, the school committee shall direct the superintendent to set to create basically what you're doing right now, creating a multi-year plan to meet those targets.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think that to me is the policy. I think the process of how you get there is more procedure, which I'm happy to discuss and like brainstorm collaboratively here. But I think yes, I'm just going to write back to the same thing. Like there's almost like something
in order to reach a balance, the appropriate balance is blah blah blah.
Yeah, it's almost like what happens. So we're going to set the funding targets, right? What's going to happen if we don't meet those funding targets? So that was just happiness, but
Probably I wasn't even looking at that one.
no, I agree. I think we're just on the same page of like, yeah, it's like, okay, notification, and I think that gets back to this 2.4 thing. And then also like school department will present a plan to
And this way we can do both. We can have the target and we can, you're in a position where it's like, okay, lay off half the school system so that we can fulfill revolving accounts in 1 year.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna have. I see it as a chart. I don't see words, so I apologize in my brain. I see FY29 with 3.1 million in it. Circuit breaker. I see FY27 with a number that helps us get there. I see FY28 with a number that takes 27 adds to it, becomes a higher number. So over 3 or 4 fiscal years, we're getting to 3.1. And if and so that to me, that's how I think of these big 5, right? Because some of them are different. Community schools is a different animal because it takes money in, it expends money, so we have to up the fee in order to make that work. Circuit breaker is different. Yeah. But circuit breaker in the overlap in intricacies of how circuit breaker works with budgeted money, like there's always a give and take, but we want to end the year with more money than you had working towards the 3.1. So I don't want to restrict Katie's ability to use some circuit breaker in order to do this. There's a lot of reconciling that happens in the fourth quarter of every year to prepare for what the next year starts looking like. Is that fair to say?
It is.
And we want to be able to make sure that we leave Katie's role and Katie the flexibility to make those things work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Again, I'm happy to wordsmith, figure out what this looks like. I think we're obviously not in place currently with the accounts. I think part of this is like, what do we do in the interim as we build that back up? And then like, what is a long-term, like, it's a healthy conversation of if you need, we talked about the circuit breaker, the goal should be kind of, but 1 year of expenses. I don't know if we want to put an actual dollar amount or percent.
One year of circuit breaker funds.
Yeah.
That's the state guidance. You should always have 1 year of circuit breaker funds. So that's the dollar value, whatever that dollar value is.
Yeah. So from like processing, like that is what the school committee is going to set as the policy around the circuit breaker funding requirement. And we are not there, like, because of anything else. We all know we're setting a balance, and that's probably true for some other ones that we are not meeting. So then again, getting back to like what happens if we have a fund balance that doesn't match the funding target, it would be this of like, what is the plan? And then that is where John, it's like the start of like, okay, here is what the school department, here's what we are proposing our plan to be. We want to invest $1 million over the next 3 years. And then that is the conversation we're going to have of like, okay, what does that mean to the operating budget? Like what does this mean with the budget cycle? Is that something that's obviously to your point, priority, the school committee all kind of aligned on within our budget priorities. But again, like, I think there's going to be some conversation of, you say $1 million for 3 years versus $800,000 over 4 years. Like, what is the difference? So, like, there might be some of that conversation. Okay, that is like the plan of how we get ultimately to the funding goal that y'all have been very clear on for 18 months. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm trying to it does. It's so 1 year, within that 4 years as the example, you could have a really good year where things just work. Like these things are so variable where all of a sudden Katie might say, you know, we're really looking good from what we budgeted for operating for out of district and transportation. And we just had a flat year. And so we can actually put in 1.2 this year.
Mhm.
But the following year it might be $8,701, right? Because we've had 9 kids move in and
Yeah.
whatever happens, right? So the flexibility is important, but the goal setting and the vigilance around having a minimum balance in that. So when we start to be able to go and explain that the expenses went higher this year for a variety of reasons, that the following fiscal year, when we're planning for the next fiscal year, we may need to dedicate more of that year's operating money to put money in there at the expense of something else. And the reason why I keep saying that a lot is this is a good conversation to have when no one's having it.
Mhm.
When you're in front of the people who want more music, more art, they want a girls' flag football team, and they want to know why we can't do more for whatever X is, and we're looking to reduce something, then they're looking to go up, we're looking to go down in order to fund this, and they say, just do that later. And the strength has to come in saying, we can't do that later.
Yeah.
We're leaving ourselves, the fiscal sustainability line in our philosophy has to really be bolded, underlined, and italicized,
Yeah.
right? This is the primary goal for the district over the next 3 years from a fiscal perspective, is right sizing, resetting the budget so it's sustainable over time, not only from the amount of FTEs that we have that we can sustain, but also through the fact that we need to have revolving accounts to support all that. And my analogy is, so the duck's swimming along and you think, oh, that's beautiful. But underneath it, all those revolving accounts are the paddles that the duck is doing. All those things happen every year.
Mhm.
And it really, but you want the public to see the duck just going around.
Yeah.
But we want to have the money that Katie needs in the revolving accounts to make all the other things work. These are ledger things weekly,
Mhm.
for special education. Jimmy, and we need to talk a little bit about expenses this year that we're incurring already that we want to be clear about to the school committee that as much as we put aside 900 grand this year, this will be parts of going to come against that eventually. Do you know what I mean?
So I think one of my concerns too, just with like if the fund balance doesn't match the goal, I'm just trying to like operationalize this.
Yeah.
Sometimes with the revolving accounts, the monitoring happens all during the year, but sometimes the activity is at the end of the year.
Mhm.
And I just have concern about, I would never, and if we think about this, I'm even trying to think about this if it's not me, right? Just in general, if it's just a policy. You don't want the notification to come to you in June or July that, oh, hey, the expenses has exceeded and now we're going to have to take a little bit more money. Because sometimes that's what happens. That's like the timing, is that the journal entries may happen in June and July.
Mhm.
And at that point, it's too late to do anything
Right.
else, right? And so I'm just trying to think about if there's a way, because the school department will present a plan on how to bring fund balances back. The plan may be a multi-year plan, but those expenses, I'm almost wondering, those expenses would have had to go somewhere, right? And there is already a school committee policy that says if we're reallocating budget, that notification needs to go to the school committee through the
Yeah.
quarterly report. If it's in the operating budget, if we're transferring funds.
Yeah. But you wouldn't be transferring funds. This would be saying, like, if we're saying you should have a years of arrears of the circuit breaker, and
Yeah,
again, we build that up into 3.1, and then 1 year we actually, if 2 kids move in that have significant needs, and actually we need to use 3.3. Like, that might be, again, totally fine. That's like why you build that up, and then we're going to be a little bit below that threshold, and then we say, all right, how do we? Okay, well, again, key would be like notifying, making sure school committee is aware, and then you all also, as the school department, say like, all right, we're now $200,000 under what we wanted to be.
Mhm.
This is how we are thinking about how to kind of get back there to rebuild those reserves, either in the next fiscal year or again, over 2 fiscal years, we're gonna add $100,000 back. Whatever. Like
Mhm.
that is what I have in my mind. I totally hear you too, though, on the language not being fees kind of come in and go out.
It's not universal.
And so like, is there a particular time in which you like, it's like if like on this date you will report on it, and then like, I don't know. So I really literally just typed that up. So I
No,
want to like totally derail. I think
Yeah.
the goal in my mind, and correct me if you're a bit different, is just how do we make sure the committee as a whole is informed about places where our expenses are exceeding kind of the income beyond kind of what the funding levels, minimum funding levels we're trying to establish are, so they're generally aware. And then how do we make sure that we are clear on, from again, holding the school committee accountable to monitor the school department of like, are we getting back to a good place over time?
Yeah, I'm in agreement on that too. Is the next step here, like Katie and John, you'll take a stab at this like you'll take a crack at this policy? Is that kind of process wise what you're thinking?
I think from my perspective, I'd like to, with Katie, take a crack at the planning of it. So I'd like to do the work first. So like, I think I have to say it, I have to write it down my way. And then have the and then have you guys say that makes sense how we get there. And then with the policy language, however that evolves, I just worry that the policy language that we're trying to apply to these accounts that are all very different, not only for the seasons in which the money is gathered, expended, some of that goes over. So you could look at the bus. If we looked at the bus revolving account every June, it would be flush because we haven't paid for because the money's collected for the passes. You know what I mean? So the seasonality of it's important, and then the uniqueness of whether you charge a fee or not. So I think circuit breaker is its own kind of thing. Community schools is its own kind of thing. I think sports and transportation might have a little bit of a sibling piece to it because we collect fees for them to part of the operation. And I'm wondering if you want to focus on the big ones first and just try to really just tackle them so we can use them as part of our assumptions for FY27.
Yeah.
That would be my goal.
I mean, again, to me, the policy for circuit breaker is simple. I think you'll laid it out. It is though having 1 year's in arrears of circuit breaker funding, right? That is the policy perspective of what the funding level should be. It again, then is what is the process, what's the procedure which y'all are going to present to us and say this is what we want to do. But I don't even, and that needs to be approved within the context of the budget overall. But I don't necessarily know that it needs to live in like the policy on how are we handling that account long term. Long term, the rules we have, that's what we have. It's 1 year based on kind of best practice. I think it's in my mind a lot less clear. Just gonna pull up the copy of what Al did, but it's just a lot less clear for me in terms of actually the other accounts. I don't know what we do want the funding balance to be in these other ones, and maybe those have minimal impact on the budgeting process overall, to your point. So happy to look at which ones we think do. You mentioned transportation.
So I think we need to focus on the self-sustaining ones to me are like their own bucket because those the fees need to cover what the expenses are.
Right.
So I almost like put those aside. And then I think the other ones are what I always refer to as like the revenue offset. So that would be transportation, athletics, like kind of, I think it's building rentals, like those are the big ones that I know we have built into the budget. So we need some guidance on that. I don't know if there's any other so I almost think that if we could come up with something for like that group, then that would be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm love to hear y'all's thoughts. I know you were hesitant to talk about the rentals themselves just because there's a bit of a mess in there. If we want to talk about busing, again, this is just kind of the initial thought I had was want some amount of operating expenses kind of within the busing. I don't know how it currently compares in terms of how much we have in the buffer, and then the
one third of our fees make up roughly $380,000 of $1 million. Roughly correct.
For transportation for this year, we're using $250,000 of the revenue we received to offset the expense. Yep. And we bring in more than that. We bring in about $300,000 in revenue. for transportation.
So the example for that one then would be if we're using of the revolving funds that come in, we use what's the equivalent of 25% of the bill that we're using revolving accounts for.
Correct.
And we're keeping the other remaining dollars in the account
Mhm.
to help, feed the following fiscal year. So
Correct.
something like that, we can come up with some sort of and because then that will dictate fees, right? So when the bus continues to go up by 8% and our fees have been flat for 5 years, if we're going to fund 25% of that bill by fees, that would then kick in. That's when you need to reach your fees.
Mhm.
That's starting to feel like it makes sense. For athletic revolving, it might be the same, that we'll dedicate X% of fees in gate receipts to the total budget. So once the total budget grows and the percentage then is not matching that, then that's our indicator to raise fees for the students and maybe gate fees end up. Do you know what I mean? The circuit breaker, I think, is a very simple one. We would like the ultimate goal is to have the state guidance fulfilled in 1 year's worth of circuit breaker in arrears for a future budget. And that's just how we're going to get there thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting to say, like, we'll raise a certain percentage of the overall cost of transportation. The way I was trying to think of it is there's mandated transportation costs, which we cannot charge a fee for. The school department needs to provide that regardless. If we had no other riders that wanted busing, we still have to have that cost. That is like a some cost. It's an obligated mandated cost for the district. And so if we assume that is just going to hit the operating budget, and then really what we want to fund through fees is any buses needed in excess of that to accommodate the optional transportation service we are providing to families.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that's a bit hard because we are using our mandated buses to provide some of that service. So I guess in my mind, I was wondering, is there a simple way of saying, hey, if we were just providing mandated busing, we could do that with 4 buses. In order to provide busing to everybody who want all the optional, we need to add an extra 2 or 3 buses, right? So let's say there's 2 buses. So we want our fees to generate enough revenue to offset the cost of 2 buses. That's going to be the standard user fee. Will get us to that number. Does that make sense?
So my story of buses looks this way, that in order to provide the legal mandate, which is all elementary students up through grade 6 into the Pierce, we need riders in order to provide the cost. I think that because it's not number of buses added for students who don't qualify for free because of the law, it's the capacity on the buses that you already, because you buy them by the whole bus.
Mm-hmm.
So the nuances are a little bit, important enough to know that just to provide the buses for the K-6 kids, we use the ridership and the fees to that to offset that to make it all work. Because as you enter the contract, you enter for a full bus for a full year.
Yeah.
You don't get to kind of surgically make that work. So I understand your thinking is absolutely technically 100% correct, but I think of the person in the community who says, well, why, like we had, why can't we all just get together and pay for another bus? It's just not that easy. So to me, what's the Dunkin' Donuts version of this? It costs $1 million to bring the amount of kids to school that we feel that we can logistically bring. And this is the offset we need to do to make that happen. I'm trying to keep it more high level for the public to understand it, because same thing with athletics. Everybody is, where does all that money go that I pay at the gate? And all of a sudden, we're explaining things down to detail. But
yeah,
I think technically you're accurate, but I think that it's nuance.
For transportation too, I think it would be interesting to break it down with the mandated riders versus non-mandated. But I have a feeling that we'd almost need the same number of buses, even with the mandated riders, because we run 3 tiers. And so we'd probably still need 10 or 11 buses for our elementary schools. We would just be running 2 tiers instead of 3. and the price is the same,
That's correct.
whether we run one tier, 2 tiers, or 3 tiers. It's the same price for the bus.
That's
There's
right. It's $1 million,
no,
period.
it's $1 million. Sometimes bus companies may quote that out differently, 1 tier versus 3 tier,
Yeah.
but for us, it's just that they quoted it out same price, regardless if we have the bus do 1 loop around town or three
That's right.
loops. So I think even if we were to turn around and say we're not going to transport any of the 7 through 12, we'd probably still need like 10 buses.
Right, I mean, you can just as, yeah, it's complicated. So I think we just need to, this is just how I learned. I would word it in a way that I could explain to somebody what I meant to call it PTO tonight. Jimmy, tell me about buses. This is how buses work. You know, we collect about 350,000, they cost $1 million. So we have to figure out how that works. So if we add a little bit more to your fee, we might get up to 375, but if we add another bus, that's 1.1 million. So you can see that we're really not offsetting that. I think that, and I guess I'm wondering whether the exercise of going through the what's mandated, what does that cost, and then decide that's a lot of human being work to do. And I guess I'm taking the shortcut of I want to know exactly what you all want to be like, you know, how do we want to approach the 5 big ones? Because it's having direct impact on what we tell principals we might need to do without next week. So we have a set of assumptions. These are the bills we have to pay.
Yep.
We have to do all this stuff in these revolving accounts. Our goal is to put this much money in them, or at least have this much money in them. And that's why we have to make these choices. So we've been explaining that to them intellectually, and we've been talking about that in our budget meetings, but we're about to scale it to all of them. And we're about to show them our assumptions in the bill that we think we have to pay, and then what that delta is. And that delta is where they have to really start doing some grindy work about how they want to realign anything in their buildings in order to get what they need done student achievement wise. And the other part is strategically, you know, keeping this a topic in front of the Warren Committee and the Select Board related to the out of district stabilization fund they have. If they wanted to make a nice deposit into that account, that would relieve the pressure on us in the pace of us filling up a circuit breaker account, because we could use those as kind of joint balances to get there collectively. So when we say there's X amount of free cash left every year, it would be nice that the revolving accounts in the town and the schools could have deposits made in those in an effort to kind of relieve the operating from those. So the other part of it is how do we want to strategically approach the work around this year's budget and, you know, the other year's budgets? I'm struggling to articulate it well.
Yeah, I think knowing, I mean,
Recorded.
some special education reserve account, I think knowing like what is a long-term goal for that, I don't know what that number should be. And again, I think that's separate from what is a 1-year goal associated with like a request to select board, and maybe 10% way too high and it needs to be 2-3%. I'm not sure, but maybe to the point Nathan you made previously is like I would appreciate as a next step, y'all could do a pass through of this.
Yeah, and just
say like,
yeah.
here are, these were my initial thoughts. So like what
Yeah,
I think maybe these make sense. And so like maybe these jive with you in some ways, maybe some don't, but you giving a quick overview
Yeah.
of like, we actually don't need a minimum balance for the Tech Craft School program. Like,
Yes.
yes, just what's in is out. Like, we don't,
makes sense.
there's no reason for us to worry about that too much. It's such small dollars. I don't know. Or maybe then we want 3 months operating expenses. I don't know. I do think for busing, again, if it's a percentage, we want to raise 1/3 of the cost of all of our buses, then maybe that's a reasonable benchmark. It does make it, if we need to add another bus in the future to accommodate for increased need from the community that is not mandated. Yeah, there's no way of getting around how that, if we're only covering 1/3 of that cost through the fees, even if we increase the fees, that there's going to be some operating budget impact to doing that.
Yeah.
And so I think my thought of trying to separate out the mandated versus the other is then we can be very clear on if the need increases or decreases for optional bus service, for opt-in bus service, that we can adjust the fees kind of address that need. Because right now, the issue we've been in is that need has kept going up. And we have an increased capacity because we didn't want to take on that cost on the operating budget, because money is tight.
Or,
Yeah,
sorry, I need to leave.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, I'm having a hard time focusing because I'm late.
I'm sorry. Okay. So next step, you'll work through this. If there's a different format, again, there is other stuff we can talk through, or I'll just reshare kind of the template document.
And the name of that is 2025-1111.
Yeah, this is in the folder. I'll drop again the copy of the town version. All right, our next meeting is next week. We already talked about that. That's the draft budget, 11/19. Are we gonna need more? Should we see if folks can have more than an hour on that? You know, the sense of
I can book for longer next week, yeah.
that is helpful, not helpful for y'all, or it'll also take us 4 years.
John, I'll just defer to you.
I also want to let us know. I'm not sure how depth what you're presenting is going to be.
Yeah, I think it's going to be more high level the next week because we have to have this conversation with the staff after their. I have my regular meeting with the manager. We want to try to go a little longer to address the subject in a high level budget goal for next year.
I don't think we're going to be able to get to the if we can get the revolving funds, great. I don't think we will. I think we set aside 12/3 to kind of come back to the revolving fund conversation. But again, if those two things need to be swapped just based on your internal work.
No, we need to give a big picture overview. Is that what you're thinking?
Okay. And then we'll just speak to the assumptions that we're using for the revolving funds in the.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anticipated, yeah. Yeah, we have to get in front of the leadership team again to get more detail about the ins and outs from a median view to closer view of the budget.
Okay.
We have work to do.
All right.
That's not really Katie's been waiting to do the work, but we're trying to move the work to the principals as best we can.
Yeah, no, that's no problem.
Are we meeting 11/26? I know.
No,
There's no
session. Yeah, 11/19 and then 12/3. I will make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor? Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, all good.